So welcome everyone to our global non-competitive geometry seminar, Americans Note today. Our speaker today is Claire Debord from Paris. So Claire is going to tell us about cyclic subsets, groupoids, and VB groupoids. So please.
So good evening, everybody. It's night here, but I guess it's not the same thing for you. So I will talk about joint work with George Skandalis, which is almost on archive. Okay, let's start. Okay. So what is a framework? I recall you that groupoids encompass spaces, groups, action, boundaries of groups, equivalence relation. So for people who don't know about these things, don't worry. I will recall some basics about groupoids and their sister algebras. What you should know for now is that when you have a groupoid, you have a space G with two maps over a unit. Maybe I should say, take this up. So you have a space G with two maps over another space which is called the unit space, and the groupoid induces an equivalence relation on G0. And in most situations, the groupoid G offers a good desangularization of the singular quotient G0 over G. What does I mean is that you can compute its sister algebra, and this sister algebra will replace the algebra of continuous function vanishing at infinity on this quotient space. So this is the first use of groupoids in non-commutative geometry, but not only this, in fact, you can make index theory thanks to groupoids. And for example, groupoids, Lie groupoids allows you to express and generalize the order zero pseudo-differential operators, and even to do it in a pseudo-differential operator free way. You can express and generalize the analytic index in a pseudo-differential operator free way, and you can give proofs of index theorems. So the story began with the work of Alain Cohn first on foliations, and later with this famous tangent groupoid in order to get the analytical index. Jean Renaud, who built the sister algebras of groupoid, and this was at the end of the 70s and very early 80s. And it has been continued by numerous authors since then. But I will not mention anyone in order not to forget no one. So what are we going to see today in this talk? We will focus on a special type of groupoids that appear in the construction of deformation groupoids. So the plan of my talk is first, I will recall basic on groupoids and give you a funny new approach. So there is a question mark here because I'm not completely sure that it's new. Maybe someone has already written this somewhere, but we haven't found it. But okay. And then we will focus on VB groupoids and see how this funny new approach enables to understand quite easily what is their dual. And to finish, we will look at the sister algebra of these types of groupoids and see that there is a Fourier transform. In fact, it's a classical Fourier transform in this situation. So that's the plan. Of course, if you have any question, you can feel free to ask. I will even try to see if there is a message, but I don't promise. Okay, so we go on groupoids and cyclic subsets. So groupoids, the shorter definition of a groupoid is that it is a small category such that every arrow is an invertible. What does it mean? Small category means that you have a set of objects and a set of arrows. And category means that you have two maps, R and S, going from the set of arrows to the set of objects, which are called the range and the source. So you should really think at an arrow as it is written here, going from the source, its source to its range. You have a partial composition, which tells you that if you have two arrows that follow one following the other one, you can make a product. So here, Y is the arrow going from S of Y from its source to its range, and its range is the source of X. And then you can make a partial product, X point Y, going from the source of Y up to the range of X. And this partial product has to be associative in the only sense it is possible to make. You also have units. So they are the elements of G0 that can be embedded into G. And so you have a map which goes from G0, a unit maps to G, and enables you to make an identification of G0 into G. And the range and source maps are identity on the units. Moreover, these units are really units for products, which means that you can make the products of an arrow with its source on the right, and you do nothing, you keep the same arrow, or a product of an arrow by its range on the left, and you keep the same arrow. And the last thing was to say that every arrow is invertible, so you have an evolution. For any arrow G, you have an arrow, in any arrow X in G, you have an arrow X inverse. And the range and the source are exchanged with the inverse map. So it means that if my arrows goes from S of X to R of X, its inverse goes from R of X up to S of X. And this inverse is an inverse for our partial product. Usually we use this notation in order to remember that we have a groupoid. So G is a groupoid with unit G0. And as I told in the introduction, G acts on G0. The orbits, 2 points are in the same orbits if there is an arrow going from one point to the other points. So this is the action that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so what are the baby examples of groupoids? The first one is a set. If you take a set, then it is a groupoid. You just have to take the range, the source, and the composition to be identity. A group is a groupoid with only one unit. A vector bundle is a groupoid. The range and the source map are just a projection. And I've taken here a vector bundle, but of course, any bundle of group is a groupoid. The pair groupoid is the following. So you take the Cartesian product x times x over x, so x are the units. So the source of xy is y, the range of xy is x. You embed x into x times x diagonally. You can make the product of xy with yz, because you want the source of this one, which is y, to be the range of this one, which is y, and this gives you xz, and the inverse of xy is yx. And if you take any equivalence relation on x, and you take its graph, and you take this maps, you get a subgroupoid of the pair groupoid, and any subgroupoid of the pair groupoid is of this type. And the last classical example is group action. Take group H acting on a space X, take the Cartesian product H times X, and consider the following structural morphism. So the source of Hx will be X, the range H of Hx will be H point X. The units of X just Ex, where E is the units of the group H. The product is written here, so K. So if you want to make a product on the left with Hx, the range here is H point X, so it has to be the source of the element you will multiply it with. So here you have Hxk, and what you get is Khx. The inverse, Hx minus 1 is H minus 1, Hx. So these are really the tiny examples. So now let's go to what I will call cyclic sets of a groupoid. It's completely, it's a completely stupid remark. So consider a groupoid J, and for any integer, you can define the set Un of G. It is a subset of G of the Cartesian product of G of n plus 1 copy of G, and you only consider element x0, x1, xn that you can, for which you can make a product, and the product is a unit. So it's the n plus 1 elements that can be composed into a unit. The U0 of G is G0. And a remark, this set is invariant under cyclic permutation. What does it mean? I look the classical cyclic permutation of Gn, and I call it lambda n, and lambda n of Un of G is Un of G. In fact, I won't use it at all, but these sets, Un of G, are sets in the cyclic category of Alan-Cohen. So I will need the following foliation for any set, and if I'm in the Cartesian product S3, Q1 will be the projection on the first factor, and Q1, 2 will be the projection on the first two elements for all the talk. So what can we say? Just, I will need Lie groupoids, so let me just recall what this means. So Lie groupoid is a groupoid such that the arrows and the units are manifolds and all maps are smooth. So what does it mean? The inclusion of units is smooth, as well as the inverse. The source and the range map are smooth map, but they also have to be submersions. Since they are submersions, the composable pair G of 2, which are the elements that for which I can make the product, is a submanifold of G times G, and then it makes sense to ask that the composition is smooth as well. Now, what does it mean with the cyclic subsets? If G is a groupoid and is moreover a manifold, then it will be a Lie groupoid if and only if the unit is a submanifold, so as before. U2 of G has to be a submanifold of G3, and the first projection has to be a submersion. And in this case, for any n, Un of G is a submanifold of Gn plus n for R. This is really easy. Okay, so the game was the game we played with was to to ask, when does cyclic sets leads to a groupoid? So that's what's coming now. So start with a set with no structure on it, G. Choose a subset, U0 of G. U2 of G, a subset of G3. And we have to ask several assumptions. First of all, for any element in U0, you ask X, you ask that XXX is on U2 of G. Then you ask that the projection of U2 of G onto the two first factors is injective. Then you consider the element of U2 of G such that the third factor is an element of U0 of G. And then you ask that the first projection is a bijection on G. Once you have those three things, you will define U1 of G to be the projection to the two first factors of R, and U3 of G, so it's a kind of technical, so it's a subset of G4 such that I can find an element UV in U1 such that XYV is in U2 and UZT is in U2. Okay. Once you have this, you ask U1, U2, and U3 to be invariant under cyclic permutation. And these are exactly the condition in order to have a groupoid structure on G, such that U0 is a set of units, U2 of G is exactly the X, Y, Z, such that XY is in G is composable, and Z is XY inverse. So of course, it's absolutely not a good way to define groupoids, but it's it will be for us a useful characterization. The proof of and I should also say that there are probably a smarter way to rephrase this hypothesis. For the moment, we haven't found it, but one can probably make better. The idea of the proof is, I just give you the first element. So I've recalled here the hypothesis. And in fact, here, the condition 3 enables you to define a range and an inverse, because you can say that for omega in R, Q1 of omega is equal to X. X is an element of G, if and only if omega is X, X inverse, and the range of X. So this determines the inverse and the range. What should be the inverse and the range? Once you have the inverse and the range, of course, you have the source, because the source of X has to be the range of X minus 1. Once you have this, you have to work a little just to show that the set of element xy with the source of X equal to the range of Y is equal to the projection onto the first two factors of U2. Okay, and so you will call it G2. And the second condition then enables to define the product, because if XY is in G2, then U2 of G is XY minus 1 is in G2 of U2 of G. And to finish, you have to play with the conditions to prove all the properties of a groupoid. It's a funny game, really. It could even be given to tiny students, because you only have to play with the rules. Okay. So now we are going to talk about VB groupoids. So maybe before giving the definition, I should give a motivation for considering these kinds of groupoids. And the motivation comes from the deformation to the normal cone construction that I really like. So recall that the deformation to the normal cone is given in the following way. If you have a V, a submanifold of a manifold, you denote by NV of M the normal bundle. And what you want to do is to glue together M times R star. So you have put out the 0, and you want to put there the normal bundle of V in M. And to do this, you can make a smooth structure. So you can describe by charts and thanks to exponential map, but you can also say that the smooth structure is generated by asking the following map to be smooth. The first one is just the projection, the natural projection that you have from this space onto M times R. So you ask this map to be smooth. And then you also ask that if M is a smooth map from M to R that vanish on V, then the function which maps xt on f of x over t and the differential of f and xc0 has to be smooth as well. And you can now equip DNC of MV of smooth structures such that this map are smooth. This construction is functorial, and this was really a great, this is really easy to see, but the really important consequence is that, for me at least, is that if gamma is a Lie groupoid and G is a subgroupoid of gamma, then the DNC of G in gamma is over DNC of G0 in gamma 0 is a Lie groupoid, with no more assumption. This was magic for us. So the most famous example of DNC construction and DNC groupoids is cone-tangent groupoids, which is the deformation to the normal cone of the diagonal of M into M cross M. So here I have the pair groupoid, and here I have the space. The groupoid has a space. And this gives, so exactly, so here it has here is how it is usually written. And this gives exactly the cone-tangent groupoid. Okay, which was my first foot in non-commutative geometry when I was in first year master. So now, what's happening now if you do this, construction? So the deformation to the normal cone construction of a groupoid into another one. You get something that looks like this. So G is a subgroupoid of gamma, and what I get something which looks like gamma times R star union the normal bundle of G in gamma over gamma 0 times R star union the normal bundle of G0 in gamma 0. But the structure here is not the structure of bundle. It's really a groupoid. The source and the range map are not equal, and this is what we call the normal groupoid, and this is a Lie groupoid. Its source and range map are induced by the differential ds and dr. The composable elements identifies with the normal bundle of the composable of G2 into gamma 2. And the product is induced by the differential of the product. So this is our, and it is, I insist, it's not considered as a vector bundle, it's really considered as a groupoid. So the source and the range are not equal. And so as a let's say we have two structures, and we have a commutative double square. So here is my normal groupoid with its range and its source. Here is my groupoid, so it is a bundle over G with its range and its source. And here it's also a bundle over G0. So the horizontal objects are vector bundles, and all the structural morphism here are linear bundle maps. And this is a typical example of what is a Weber groupoid. So what is the formal definition? A Weber groupoid over groupoid G is a vector bundle E over G with a structure of groupoids. And E0 is a vector subbundle of the restriction of E to G0. The structural maps of the groupoid here are linear bundle maps. And we have this strange assumption, which says that RE from E to the pullback of E0 thanks to R is surjective. This means that if you take an element U in E over a product gamma 1, gamma 2, then this element can be obtained as being a product of an element over from E over gamma 1 with an element of E over gamma 2. So that's what this means. I may try to write it, maybe. Yes, I may try to write it. I don't know if it will work. No, that seems to work. Okay. So I just want to say that this condition, which seems very surprising, is in fact very, very natural. Okay. And in the Lie case, the VB groupoid E identifies with the normal groupoid of G into E. So that's why my previous example was really a typical example. When J is a point, we call E a linear groupoid. So when J is a point, in fact, here you have a vector space and you have two linear map into a vector subspace. And in fact, in this situation, once you are given your two vector maps, linear maps, sorry, there is only one possible structure of groupoids. So the range of the source determines the groupoid structure. And you can see that because of linearity, if you take composable elements in U2 of X, Y, in E, then the product X point Y has to be X plus Y minus the source. And the inverse is the range plus the source minus X. Okay. That's all. If you have any question, just. Okay, so the dual of a Weber groupoid. So I should say that the construction can be also found in Mackenzie's book, but it's not the same. And well, we found it more easily to understand like this, at least for us, for me and George. So let's start with the VB groupoids. And for any integer k, consider as previously UK of E. So remember, it's a product, it's elements on E on k plus 1 copies of E, such that you can make the products and get a unit. And this thing is the subbundle of the restriction over EK of G of EK plus 1. over GK plus 1. We will identify the dual bundle of IK of G, IK over GK with E star K. And now the dual bundle is, so I just consider E star, the usual dual bundle. It is a Weber groupoid over G with UK of E star being the orthogonal of UK of E, which means the elements in EK plus 1 star, restricted, of course, to UK of G, such that when they restrict to UK of E, it's 0 for any EK. So it's classic. And so this is the dual. So it's really a natural definition, in fact. I just take the standard dual, but in this framework. So when E is a linear groupoid, okay, so that, as we have seen, is when G is a point, E star is a linear groupoid as well, and here are the source and the range maps. And as I told, they completely determine the structure of the groupoids. The cotangent groupoid of Cos-Dazor-Weinstein is exactly the dual groupoid of the, I don't know how to call it, of the groupoids that you obtain if you take the tangent bundle of G with, you just differentiate all the maps. So this is a natural Weber groupoid, and its dual is the cotangent groupoid of Cos-Dazor-Weinstein, which has been very useful in symplectic geometry. Okay, I don't want maybe to. Okay, so maybe just so how do we show this result? We just show it using the characterization I gave to you of when does a groupoid is a groupoid once I have given the UK. But maybe I should give you the structural morphism. So if A is a Weber groupoid, then the structural morphism of the dual Weber groupoids are the following. So the source and range, maybe I just want to talk about the product because it's the more easiest to understand. If I have gamma 1, gamma 2, which are composable in G, and I take V1 into the dual of E over gamma 1, V2 into the dual of E over gamma 2, C into E gamma, gamma being the product, gamma 1, gamma 2, then the product V1, V2, so it has to be applied to an element in here, will be just V1 of C1 plus V2 of C2 for any C1 in E gamma 1 and C2 in E gamma 2. It doesn't depend on the choice there, such that C is equal C1 times C2. So it's really natural. And this is a way to get convinced that we end with the same groupoid as the one of Cos-Dazor-Weinstein, because they how it is described there. Okay. So now that we have groupoids and VB groupoids and their dual, let's go to their C-star algebras. So let me recall how to construct the C-star algebra of a groupoid. So G is a groupoid, and you consider the algebra of you consider the continuous function with compact support, let's do it again. The infinite function with compact support over G. And you'll define the convolution product of f1 times f2 over x as being the integral for x1, x2 in G such that the product is equal to x of f1 of x1, f2 of x2 d mu. But you have to give sense to these things. So how to do this? First of all, you notice that the set of x1, x2 in G times G such that x1, x2 is equal to x is a smooth manifold. In fact, x1 is in what we denoted G Rx, so it's a set of y in G such that the range of y is equal to the range of x. And then x2 is just x1 minus 1 times x. So d mu here is a smooth R system, which means that I have chosen a smooth family of Lebesgue measure on every manifolds in every range bundle, in every G of U range fiber. This system of measure has to be left invariant, which means that for every x in G, the measure mu Sx and mu Rx can be exchanged through the diffeomorphism y goes to x times y. And so your convolution formula really looks like a usual convolution formula. f1 times f2 of x is the integral over g r of x of f1 of y, f2 of y minus 1 x, d mu r of x in y. The convolution is associative by invariance of the R system and Fubini. Once you are here, you define an adjoint of f. It will be f star, which x map to fx minus 1 bar. You choose an operator norm. I should state that there is no better choice. There are at least two better choices, but they don't lead always to the same C-star algebra. And the C-star algebra of G is a completion of CCO infinity of G for this norm. And as I tell, there is not only one. And in the good case, again, this C-star algebra will be used in order to replace the algebra of continuous function vanishing at affinity on the quotient space. So let's look at some examples. If you take the pair groupoids, then the C-star algebra of G is just the algebra of compact operator. And the space of orbits here is a point, and the algebra of compact operator is equivalent to C. If you take a fiber product of M times M over B, where B is M is where you have a summation from M to B, the C-star algebra of G is just the continuous function on B, vanishing at affinity if B is not compact, times K, which is equivalent to the continuous function on B, again, up to Morita equivalence, up to K theory, which is what we are dealing after with. If G is a vector bundle, so a classical vector bundle this time, so the source and the range are just the projection, the C-star algebra of G is the algebra of continuous function vanishing at affinity on the dual, where the equality comes thanks to the Fourier transform, standard Fourier transform. And that's exactly what we are going to extend. Well, to extend, it's the same map, but no. So now what's going on when you have a VB groupoid? So I have my VB groupoid here again. First of all, you can notice that if you restrict E to a unit of G0, a unit of G0 can be seen in G, which is a zero section of E. So you can make but not restrict. So you look at your vectors. It's a vector bundle of G. So you look at the fiber of an X being a unit. Then this is a subgroupoid of E, and it is a linear groupoid. For any gamma in G, if you look E gamma, so the fiber of E over gamma, it is a linking space between ESX and ERX. So it induces a Morita equivalence between these two groupoids. And you can consider the family of Hilbert module, C star E gamma, so they are constructed almost like the C star algebras of the groupoid. And this is what is called the Fell bundle. And C star of E is the C star algebra associated with this Fell bundle. So maybe I should tell you a few words about what are these Fell bundle. I won't get into the details because it would take lots and lots of time. So to give you an idea of what it is, we should start with groupoid action. So you have a C star algebra A, which is fibered over G0, and you suppose that G acts on A by isomorphisms on the fiber. So you have, for any gamma in G, you have an isomorphism between A in S of G of gamma up to A in R of gamma, the fiber of F, A over S gamma or R gamma. When you are in such situation, you can construct a reduced and maximal cross product. It's really, really exactly as one can you do with group. But in fact, you can do even better. You can go further, I should say. So Fell bundles are based exactly in the same idea, but instead of having isomorphism here, what you have is Morita equivalence bimodules. And you can make an analogous construction to get cross product. So again, reduced or maximal cross products. And that's what is called the Fell bundle C star algebra. So it's exactly the same idea. So now in our case, I'm going very, very too fast. So I have my VB groupoid up, and I can consider the classical Fourier transform. So E of X is a vector space, E of X is its dual, and so the classical Fourier transform is an isomorphism between the Schwartz function over EX up to the Schwartz function over the dual. And in fact, you can show really easily that the adjoint in C infinity of E, so it's the adjoint in the sense of groupoids that I've just recalled, is mapped to the adjoint into C infinity of E star. And it's the same thing with the product. So the convolution in C infinity of E is mapped to the convolution in C infinity of E star. So in fact, it induces an isomorphism of the C star algebra of E of X. This is for elements on the unit. And in fact, it behaves well also with the linking space. So it also behaves well with the Morita bimodule, which means that for any gamma in G, the Fourier transform F gamma, which is still an isomorphism between the Schwartz space of E gamma to the Schwartz space of its dual, satisfies the following. So F in gamma 1 minus 1 of the adjoint is mapped to the adjoint, and F in gamma 1 times gamma 2 of the product is mapped into the product. And in other words, this tells you that the Fourier transform is an isomorphism of the corresponding cell bundles because it respects the products, it maps the C-star algebras to the C-star algebras, and the Morita equivalence to the Morita equivalence is compatible with everything. Thus, if you have a VB groupoid and A étoile its dual, then the C-star algebra are isomorphic via Fourier transform. In fact, what is happening here is exactly what is happening in the usual life. I mean, Fourier transform maps when you have just vector bundle and space, it maps the convolution product to the point product. Here it's the same things. It respects the products thanks to duality. And I should finish by just saying that, in fact, what we do here, we do it for VB groupoids, which means that E is a vector bundle. But as you can imagine, we can do exactly the same things when E is a bundle of group. There is no way, no reason for this not to work in the same way. And that's all that I had to say. So thank you. I'm sorry, I thought that I have been very fast.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I have several small questions. My first question is, as you mentioned very early, you had a cyclic object when you consider all the powers, I mean, the composability for the groupoid. So I have one suggestion for this, which is that it seems—
Just a second, I take a pen.
Yeah, I mean, there are two things which seem quite relevant in this way, which is the first one is that, after all, to the convolution algebra of the groupoid, there is an algebra, and then this algebra has a cyclic module assigned to it, which is A natural. So it seems there should be a relation between the two. But in fact, there is something more. There is something more because by listening to your talk, I was quite, I mean, I got the following idea that in fact, one should enlarge the framework from groupoids to cyclic manifolds. By this, I mean that you do not impose the condition that you were imposing on the levels 2 and 3 and so on, but you just consider a cyclic object among manifolds, where you assume that the maps are submersions when it's natural to have submersions. And then, if you want, the advantage of this is that you are no longer working, you are now working in an additive category, which is quite a different framework just from the strict framework of algebras. So, I mean, so this is one possibility. But I mean, as a much lighter comment, I just wanted to say one thing, which is that when you consider an elliptic curve, the natural thing which is given by the elliptic curve is not the addition. It is the fact that x plus y plus z is equal to 0 as is obtained by intersecting the elliptic curve with a line. So, and then you have to take a triple point and declare that this triple point is the unit to have a group law. But somehow I think there must be instances also in algebraic geometry where the type of structure that you describe is more natural than to give the, if you want, the thing by itself. I mean, okay, and the final very small comment, but this is just an extreme detail, is that of course, I mean, one can make things canonical. You don't have to choose the R system. You can use necessities, but it's heavy to carry around, and I understand why you don't do it. I mean, you know.
Yes. In fact, I never use R system. I use densities, Alf densities.
Alf densities, yes, yeah, because they are canonical. So this means the construction is entirely canonical, which is
yes. But for new people coming,
Yeah, sure.
it's easier to imagine what is a acid system, I think. Well,
Which is what Jean Renaud introduced quite early.
yeah. Mhm. Well, thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah, I think there is really some ground to be explored by taking cyclic manifolds. I mean, because there will be lots of examples. They won't lose the structure from what you explained, and there might be examples which are far more exotic. In fact, when you go to that situation.
Okay, Willie, you have a question?
Yeah, a small comment. I mean, regarding this cyclic set at the beginning, once the groupoid, once the G is a groupoid, when you have a string of n+1 things such that the product is an identity, the last one is determined by the rest.
Yes.
So, and then what you get if you eliminate that coordinate is the usual nerve of the groupoid. It's a simplicial set. Now there is a characterization of when a simplicial set is the nerve of a groupoid, and this is determined by the first, I don't know, 2 or 3 dimensions. And so perhaps using this characterization, you can recover your result that a groupoid is determined by this U0, U1, U2. Yeah. That was all.
Yes. But as I told you, there's these little things were mostly useful to get the dual structure, in fact.
George, you have a question?
Yeah, maybe just the comment that it was funny for us to
Je croyais que tu serais pas là.
to see that, we found it funny that the cyclicity, that the conditions were just the cyclic invariance. That was the funny thing for us. The other ones are a little too technical, and probably we should find a way to get rid of them. And the cyclicity was the important thing. And as Alain says, probably just taking cyclic things would be enough. Okay, I disappeared.
Okay. Do you have any other questions or comments? Okay, in that case, let's thank our speaker again for a beautiful talk.